the system. I think so that you can understand what we are trying to do as far as possible for um, all of the agricultural goods to get through the system. I think the cooperation between us has been quite good over this last period. Where there have been hiccups, I think we've been able to unblock on both sides, and we're quite appreciative for all of the assistance that we have been getting. Yeah, and also thank you for the offer for the mask that was made, and then also Crystal for the food parcels that you were able to hand out to the community in Cape Town. So let me just get to Cape Town specifically because it was quite topical. We, in fact, on Friday, I was quite positive that up until that time, we had not had any positive COVID-19 cases within TPT. By the afternoon, that changed because we had the first one in Cape Town. The results came through in Cape Town. That also then led to employees becoming very anxious and embarking on a work stoppage, which impacted us most of the afternoon on Friday, and then also on Friday night. The night shift refused to work at all. We had both local management engaging organized labor to put employees at ease. But I think with Cape Town becoming the epicenter of this disease, it's made it a little bit difficult to get employees to understand. As a business, we have been doing everything in our power to follow all the protocols, and we have complied. We've had the Department of Health there to ensure that everything that we were doing were in line with the protocols, and they gave us the green light. In fact, they were very happy with the type of things that we had in place in Cape Town specifically. We got employees the Saturday morning. We had the same situation. Eventually, I think, Christo, I gave you feedback as this was going. Eventually, on Saturday afternoon, employees went back to work. That shift ended at 1800. The 1800 shift worked throughout the night until 0600. But during that shift, I think it was around about 18:30 that evening, I then received notice of 4 more cases in Cape Town Container Terminal, which obviously, as they were coming fast and furious, we had to very quickly talk about what we were going to do. I then made a decision together with the team to shut down the terminal the next morning from 0600 to 1800 so that we can do deep cleaning and decontamination of the terminal and get people back to work at 1800. Fortunately, from 1800, we were able to start up the operation again, and things continued as normal. So thus far, Cape Town is back to the, I don't want to say normal operations, I want to say the COVID-19 operations, which was basically they were operating 4 gangs. We're back to operating the 4 gangs at Cape Town Container Terminal. And we are now trying to push across the system to get to higher levels of at least 75%, and then starting work on getting some more operators in so that we can. Hello? And then starting to get more operators in across the system. Unfortunately, it takes a bit of time. We did have some people in training. We're just establishing how far their training is so that we can start introducing them into the system. And hopefully we will get to the 75% level in both Cape Town and Kucha. PECT seem to be operating okay. We'll talk about what the plan is there also. And then in Durban seemed to have been working very well. Durban Container Terminal has been, they've been up to 11 gangs. But you'll see across the system that we don't have vessels waiting like we used to. I think Earl will talk further about that. In Cape Town, we do have vessels at anchorage, and that's largely because, yes, we did have the situation the weekend, but before that, we had vessels waiting outside. I think it was between 3 and 4, mainly because of the inclement weather that was being experienced in the Cape. Last night we had a wind stoppage again for just over 5 hours. And yeah, so there's the team is pretty much in recovery mode within Cape Town. Kucha, we are continuing to see how we can improve the level of operations there. You recall that we previously had three gangs working one. We've pushed the terminal to give us the 4 gangs to work 2 vessels at a time. And then I'm also now requesting that we start working towards almost a level 3 process, because I think we are all hoping that that will be announced soon. So the team is working to see how we can gradually ramp up so that we can get to, we want 100% available. Even if we can't deploy them at any particular point in time, we need to have them available in case deployment becomes necessary. I think Earl can then continue on the operation status for everyone.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Earl?
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. Earl speaking. Michelle has actually covered most of what it was that I wanted to share as well. I think safe to say Michelle has covered much of the water side in terms of the vessels. I would like to add, though, from the container perspective and the readiness, obviously, for the respective season that we're going into, a lot of work has taken place around how do we actually execute in the supply chain with the cold stores, and also getting this through our gates at the respective container terminals. Prior to this, about 4 months, 6 months earlier, we have looked at our plugs, particularly around the reefer area. So all our plugs within our network are fully functional and ready, obviously, for the reefer season. We understand, and we're starting to see the information that has been shared with us saying is that we can expect a bumper crop. We're seeing very strong numbers coming through, which is great. I think our only challenges that we're firming up with the respective lines as well and the stores is that I think we require a bit of greater accuracy in terms of what has been shared with Transnet and what actually arrives. Because the one thing obviously that we want to ensure is that we don't want any of these products waiting in queues, particularly during this period of time. We want to get them into the terminals as soon as possible. That's the one thing. What has also assisted us greatly, particularly if we talk about the Durban Container Terminal, we have gone live with a mandatory truck appointment system, essentially for containers coming in. Initially, I know there was a lot of anxiousness around this. However, subsequently, the go live, which was essentially on the 28th of March of this year, we've really seen a great uptake. We've also seen great compliance, and the benefit, I think everyone has really derived from that. Ordinarily, in a normal day at Durban Container Terminal, we would do anything between 3,000 to 3,500 containers. What we have seen during this period of time, we've managed to do 3,600 using the same truck appointment system. What it has done, though, it has smoothed the curve that we don't have these peaks and troughs. What we've also done further to that is that we've done a lot of work around how it is that we facilitate the movement of reefers, particularly coming through our gates, in the sense that for a priority in terms of how do we deal with it during this reefer season. I know there was a lot of questions around it, so that boxes don't end up sitting in queues with normal dry boxes. So work has been done with that in terms of our allocation for appointments. At the other terminals, it is fairly stable. We don't have any issues, particularly on the land side. With regard to the weather delays that we've seen not much, except for, I would say, in Kucha and in Cape Town, that we've seen some traces of disruptions that we've seen. And that was really fog that we've seen in wind. But the bounce back has really been good, and it's been quick from our side as well. Apart from having to deal really with the issues around COVID, as we also have to support the employees that's working during this period of time. So a lot of work is going into that as well. Particular areas like the MPTs as well. I know we don't often speak about the MPTs, but we also have the capability at our MPTs that...
Sorry, Earl, what is an MPT?
Yes. Oh, sorry, there's a multi-purpose terminal. So for that, use our multi-purpose terminal facilities, like in Cape Town, in Durban, Maiden-Wharf as well. These facilities has also now been equipped, or not been equipped. They had reefer facilities. We've also just made sure that we've maximized on the plugs, they're particularly around the reefers as well, that we can service the respective commodities coming through, particularly on the citrus season. On the agri side, our agri facilities are both open. Our London and our Durban facilities open as well. So we are ready to receive particular working the exports. We've done some small volumes though. We've seen the malters coming through. But should there be any other demand coming through, we are ready to handle that cargo. Essentially in East London, we can ramp up fairly quickly. And it's really based on once vessels is advised that they are coming to East London, it's quick for us to switch on within a 24-hour period in order to start up operations. But it is operational. Agriport is exactly the same, where we also handle export maize, import wheat, and malt as well at the Maiden-Wharf terminal. So fairly a much better picture than what we anticipated initially. And the environment is really stabilized, and we've really managed now to come up across the country within the TPT environment for operations. We are trending in the region of 78% operational level of readiness in terms of handling what we ordinarily would have handled. So that's very much where we are. And we're obviously working very closely with respective associations to try and ensure that we keep the supply chain seamless.
Thank you, Earl. Thanks. I think it's quite a thankless job that you guys have, but we want to thank you for all the good things you are doing for our industry and for the country in general. I just want to open the floor for any constructive questions. Is there anybody that want to ask Earl or Michelle a specific constructive question? They're obviously at the helm of things, and they've been working with us throughout this COVID period amidst a lot of challenges. Okay, any questions, Yanni, from your side?
Yeah, Omri, thank you very much. Earl, I was specifically interested in the grain terminals, which you've responded to, and I assume that the other private terminals like RBT and SA Bulk terminals are fully operational at the moment.
To my knowledge, yes, Yanni, they are all operational as well. Partly, remember, it's also an industry what obviously that was deemed and seen as essential. So we've not had any challenges, and they were open. Prior to the lockdown and post-lockdown, they were open. They were operational.
Thank you.
Thanks for that, Earl. Some more questions for Earl and Michelle. Come, now is the time, or forever hold your peace.
Omri Werner here from the fruit side. I just would like to ask a question to Earl and Michelle on excellent work that you've done in Cape Town as well. And I think the required sensitivity of handling the multiple COVID cases in the port terminal is also very difficult to manage. But my question is there a SOP or a mitigating measures procedure available for avoiding the situation where the port stands still for 12 hours after COVID-19 incident, given the fact that the required sensitivity is needed in this time?
Yeah, I think I can respond to that. Look, we do have all of the protocols and standard operating procedures in place. This particular incident, I just have to point out, was one that was a bit of an extreme case. It was not, let's call it an exception to what we would have expected. And it was purely because we received these large numbers of results coming through. And in fact, the numbers 3, I think, out of the 5, or 4 out of the 5 were all from the same shift. But interestingly is that we know for a fact that these were not, our people are not getting sick on site. They are contracting the disease off site. And that we know for a fact. I think, so in this particular instance, we closed. It is certainly not the intention for us to be closing the terminal every time we have a notification of a positive result, because we're doing the cleaning and the decontamination as a matter of course, as part of our normal business now anyway. So this particular one was really an exception. It's not our intention to do that all the time. In fact, we had a positive case at the MPT that I got at the same time. And we did not close the multipurpose terminal. We did the cleaning while everybody was there. But this one was just an exception because we had this almost a cluster at one particular time. So we do have the protocols. In fact, I have shared with some colleagues from the CGA have also requested. We do have the protocols in place and we are following them strictly. I mean, I think you can rest assured that it won't happen where we have to shut down the terminal for, well, touch wood, for 12 hours again. It's something that we are working towards avoiding as much as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Some more questions?
So, sorry, just to add, we've done quite a bit of education with employees now to say to them, if they, if you are at home before you come to work in the morning, how are you feeling? And we've put certain things, certain questions that we ask them to say, don't come to work, if you are at work, what are the things that you do if you're feeling a certain way so that we can get you out of the workplace? So hopefully this education will assist our employees to do the right thing as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Any more questions from the group?
Omri, if I may perhaps just in closing, I actually forgot to mention that the automotive terminals, or as known as the RoRo terminals, they also, all three of our facilities are operational as well. And that particular of the high and heavy, so agricultural equipment are imported through these facilities, so they are operational.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
I think the mechanization guys, the tractor guys, I see Jock is also on the call, John Deere, and these guys are very thankful for that. Okay, last round of questions for Earl and Michelle before we move over to PSG.
Omri, it's all speaking again. Omri, I just wanted to check, I'm not sure if it's further on the agenda. Is there going to be any sharing also how the COVID-19 is impacting the industry as well on your side?
Yes, Earl will be, Christo and I will be concluding with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, doesn't look like there's any other questions. So let's go over to Brent and Adrian Pas. Guys, do you have a presentation that you're going to share with us, or how do you think of doing it?
Morning, Omri, Brett here. I'll just give a brief intro and then Adrian will raise a presentation and speak to a presentation in his slot. So let me kick off and then Adrian will kick off immediately after me with his presentation. So first up, just a big thank you for joining us all this morning. As Omri has said, my name's Brett Lambert. I'm the head of PSG Distribution Wealth. Just a very big thank you from our side for affording us the opportunity of participating in your event this morning. It's great to be with all of you this morning, and we really do hope that we'll be able to add value to you all this morning. I think to your last question that was raised there, I'm hoping that Adrian will most certainly shed some insights into where we see everything moving going forward. I think as everyone's aware, the past few weeks have been extremely challenging, both for South Africans and for the world at large. I think from a PSG point of view as a firm, we have over the last number of years been focused on becoming more digitally enabled. With the outbreak of COVID-19 in South Africa, coupled with President Ramaphosa's message to the nation on the 15th of March, thankfully, through our progressive systems and procedures, we've managed to ensure business continuity through these times. I think it's most certainly in these uncertain times that businesses will be differentiated on their ability to continue to provide service excellence to clients. We've been consistently preparing for variations of the possible impact of this virus. We've managed to ensure that our day-to-day operations continue uninterrupted amidst the national lockdown. During this time, we'll continue to do everything possible to ensure that we're able to assist new clients and, most importantly, continue delivering on our service promise to our existing clients as well. We've made use, and I think that all of us have been subjected to some rapid change. We've made use of a number of new digital channels to communicate and interact with both new and existing clients. We've seamlessly moved from personal events to digital events, a la the Teams meeting today and via webinars. We've effectively started communicating more actively through social media. And I think what was initially been referred to as business unusual is now fast becoming business as usual. And I think it's going to most certainly change the way that we interact and do business going forward. I think from our perspective, the future was always going to be digital enablement. And this crisis has done nothing more than to accelerate us into the future. And I think all of us are going to be forced to become more digitally efficient and enabled going forward. I think much of what we are doing now will become the new norm going forward. Just from our PSG perspective, we've obviously seen the relaxation from stage 5 down to stage 4. I think our key message is that we will return certain key staff to the offices, but the majority of our staff are going to continue to work remotely. And I think, you know, as a responsible corporate citizen, I do think that it is important to ensure that only really key essential staff do return to offices, just in order to try and curb the effect of this virus. I think from our side, communication has never been more important. It's why we would love to continue to interact with you through this type of forum, and we will most certainly be expanding our communication to our client base via this type of event. On that note, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Adrian Pask, to you. Adrian is the head of our PSG multi-manager business. He's also the Chief Investment Officer of the PSG Wealth business. He's responsible for the management of approximately 85 billion rands worth of assets on behalf of clients, and he also has the responsibility of overseeing an additional 150 billion rands worth of assets under the PSG Wealth banner. Coupled with all of that, he also oversees all of the research emanating from PSG Wealth. Adrian's topic is basically going to give some context to COVID-19. He's going to couple that in with the double whammy of the recent downgradings that we've experienced. And I think what he is going to do is going to look at the long-term opportunities that these crises may present. So, Omri, thank you very much for the time. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Adrian Pask. We will run a chat box if possible. If you do want to raise your questions, raise them in the chat box, and Adrian has made some time available at the end of it with a view to just dealing any possible questions you might have, if that's okay with you, Omri.
Yes, it's 100%. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, over to Adrian then. Thanks very much for the time.
Great. Thanks, Brett, and thanks, Omri and team, for having us this morning to share some thoughts on the current environment. Can you all see the presentation on screen, just to confirm?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. So obviously, this presentation was prepared firstly for our wealth managers, to give them some guidance in terms of what we think the debates are that they should be having with clients at the moment. So it gives a bit of context to some fairly complicated topics in terms of the impact of COVID on the economy and markets, and then some more practical advice to the end, which was compiled with both clients and businesses in mind. So in terms of the contents of the presentation, I'll focus a little bit on the pain that was experienced both in the economy and markets, as I said, where we see this in context of a longer term picture, which in our environment is really critical. If you start investing for, a longer period of time for retirement for most of our clients, or even through a business cycle for our businesses, it's really important to keep a longer term mindset here. And then that's not to say that there's some very material risks that we do see, and these are things that we speak of quite often, which I'll mention here as well. And then just some pointers in terms of where to from here, as I mentioned, some practical advice that we've been giving our clients in this environment. So in terms of the pain, this market correction was the fastest 30% sell-off in history. So if you go back to the Great Depression of the 1930s, as you can see here, it took 23 days, 24 days in those early 30s periods of the Great Depression to see those two corrections sell off by 30%. The one that we saw start on 19 February took all of 22 days. So if you sit in an environment like that, you can understand that obviously there's a sense of panic in terms of the consequences that something that this might have through the economy and ultimately corporate earnings and share prices, and then hence the dramatic sell-off. That said, the speed at which the sell-off took place was ultimately, at least to date, more severe than the ultimate extent of that sell-off. So if you look back, even though the pace was similar to what we saw during that Great Depression period and later, if you look at some of these pullbacks, they are substantially larger. So on average, if you look at these 5 larger ones that we've seen over the last 90 odd years, the markets can pull back as much as 60% when there's panic to the extent that we've seen more recently. Excuse me. If we then look at what we saw now in COVID-19 more recently, that was 34% ultimately. So I think the important question is that if you've got a sell-off like this, the typical questions that we do field at the moment is, how long will it last? How long will it take the market to ultimately find a bottom? Clients are obviously quite tentative at the moment. You think that things look attractive, and then ultimately you get in only to suffer another blow in the market. So those are the kind of things that's weighing on clients at the moment. The research here on screen was research prepared by Yardeni Research, who's a North American research and asset management firm. Essentially, all that this says is we don't know how long the existing COVID-19 correction will take in terms of its duration. But if you look at the preceding 50 years and all the market corrections of 10% or more, typically what you do find is that they vary quite dramatically. So ultimately you sit here with 6 of these that were multi-year type of drawdown. So this is not even peak to trough and up again to a recovery point. This is just to find the bottoms. And then obviously there's a recovery and rebuilding period that needs to take place after that. So if you start to look at numbers like 900 odd days, this is very long periods that you spend underwater from a market perspective. But as you can see here, the far greater majority are typically, even under 100 odd days. So roughly 2/3 of these observations are typically under 100 days. So interesting research that was conducted through our investment partners at Goldman Sachs was to understand what type of declines do you ultimately suffer. So if you think of a structural type of event like the global financial crisis, which was an internal implosion of sorts, those tend to typically take a bit longer. So that's where you would potentially look at a multiple 100 days of drawdowns. Cyclical refers to something more orientated to interest rates or a business cycle, which isn't really what we're experiencing at the moment. What we are experiencing at the moment is something that's external and event driven. And if you look at those typical declines, they're more or less around that 30% mark, which is coincidentally exactly what we observed during this correction. And if you look at the average length, and this provides a sense of hope that the average length tends to be significantly shorter than other types of corrections. So you can imagine something like a structural implosion of something in the financial markets. You lose a lot of trust in that system, and it takes a long time to rebuild and reformulate regulation, etc., etc. Essentially, what we're doing now is passing laws and regulations to combat a very immediate situation which is unlikely to sustain itself for multiple years or decades, like a structural type of implosion would. Hence, the impact is less severe and the duration is shorter. And then obviously also the time to recover out of this is typically shorter. So our sense would be, if you look at the previous table, we're most likely looking at something closer to the green bars in terms of 100 odd days, as opposed to something on the red side where we're looking at 100 days of market drawdown. If you look at some of the global GDP forecast that's been put forward, that seems to portray a similar picture. So if you look at the numbers that were put forward in the IMF report circulated a couple of weeks ago, they looked at the global economy. They anticipate a roughly 3% drawdown with a V-shaped recovery on the economic front going into next year. So 5.8% for 2021. So again, that's good. I think that's what's even more encouraging from an emerging market perspective is if you look at how they've split this up between advanced economies and emerging economies. Is firstly, they expect advanced economies to suffer more than what emerging markets would. And secondly, if you look at 2021, emerging economies is actually set to recover and use that as a platform for growth in 2021 in relation to advanced economies. So the general expectation is for advanced economies to suffer a bit. So if you look at the COVID numbers that's coming out, you can clearly see, US, UK under significant pressure in this environment. It's highly financially integrated systems and economies. Therefore, the impact is actually quite severe, and it's complicated to try and fix it. And there's also, if you look at the US economy, largely consumer-driven economy, small to medium enterprises contribute quite a bit to GDP growth. So it's going to be difficult for those type of businesses to thrive again. If you look at the Reserve Bank Monetary Policy Review Statement, also released a couple of weeks back, where they looked at the evolution of trading partner growth forecasts. So that's to gauge how well our trading partners would typically be doing. So in our case, especially Europe and China are significant players in this environment. When they did this review, obviously none the wiser to COVID that's coming in October, November last year. This was actually trending upwards for the year, going into 2021, even only then starting to flatten off a little bit. And we did see some emerging markets starting to rally just before COVID-19 entered. Going into March, they quickly revised downwards. And then when they did the latest monetary policy review a couple of weeks back, they revised downwards quite significantly. So obviously, these are our clients, in terms of trading partners. So if they suffer, obviously it will also have an impact. So it's likely that South Africa will experience, the South African experience likely to be a little bit different to what the typical emerging market would experience. I think our contraction is likely to be more significant on the downside, and probably the rebound going into 2021 is going to be less rosy. That being said, we don't expect a protracted, drawn out recession type of environment where we report shrinking numbers for a prolonged period of time. If we look at the direct cost of the lockdown, goes without saying that, a crisis like this affects all sectors of the economy, and you can see how that how these numbers are put together again through that monetary policy review that was put forward. So this is the Reserve Bank's expectations of the shrinkage in the various industries. And then if you look at the expected unemployment or the numbers in terms of how they see job losses, this is a big theme globally. We see even US numbers. They were essentially setting new records for unemployment under 4%, and then literally on the turn of a dime, this is now already around that 15% level. They expect it to peak around the 17% level is the new forecast. So 17% unemployment numbers in the US is quite significant. The impact of that will be quite severe. So you can understand why the IMF is not very optimistic around the outlook for developed markets. In South Africa, they expect 370,000 job losses in the formal sector alone. If you look at some of the forecasts that's coming through across the economy, essentially we're looking at least 2 million job losses. So it's going to have a very big impact. And also in terms of insolvencies, they expect 1,600 more business insolvent going into this year. If you then start to look at what the impact is going to be on the unemployment rate numbers in South Africa, you can see the blue line here looks at unemployed persons. So this is per thousand, so roughly at that 6.5 million level. This is likely to move closer to the 10 million level. It's very, very likely that we'll see unemployment levels breach that 35% level. And it's not unlikely that we'll see unemployment levels move between 40 and 50%. So, you know, in terms of the ugly looking numbers that we'll see abroad and as well as domestically, I think unemployment sits as one of the more concerning ones, which sort of leads into what monetary policy and fiscal policy has been focusing on more recently. So there's a lot of talk around flattening the infection curves, but I think on the other end of that same coin, we sit with policymakers that are trying to flatten, excuse me, our recession curves. So what they can do is obviously with monetary policy, they cut interest rates. We've already seen some of that. We actually expect a little bit more to come, but I'll give you a slide or two on that. And then in terms of fiscal stimulus around the globe, again, various stimulus packages in terms of making capital available so that business can remain afloat. The extent of this, you can clearly see that, you know, given the backdrop of the unemployment numbers and insolvent businesses, etc., you would expect the policymakers to jump on this quite quickly. So luckily they have done that. So if you look at what the stimulus was going back into 2008, the global financial crisis, which is represented here in the blue. So for that 3-year period, you know, it was for the US, for example, 6% of GDP. What they've done now in 2020, just in 6 weeks, already exceeds what they did in 3 years during 2008 and to 2010. So policymakers are not messing around with it. I think it's very much a case of accepting that, you know, you can rather cut interest rates and make sure you survive. And if you need to push it back up again, you can make a plan. But you don't want to be late on things. That's not going to be good because, you know, once the horse is bolted and the damage is done, it's very difficult to repair things. The breakdown is typically much easier as life typically goes. So through this, you know, talking about monetary policy, that specifically actually refers to interest rates. So what we did see going back to 2007, we saw higher interest rates. Then we had the global financial crisis, and central banks reduced interest rates to make capital available, encourage spending, etc. And we had that low interest rate environment for a prolonged period of time. But I think, you know, if you look at the correspondence and statements that were sent out through these policymakers, it's very much a case of we need to normalize interest rates to ensure that we have a lever to pull. It's only a matter of time before we suffer some type of event. You know, if you look at the history, which I'll show you as well, it's perfectly reasonable to expect something disastrous to happen typically every 10 years somewhere. And the sense was very much that they need to get their monetary policy in shape into a situation where they can cut to stimulate if there's a crisis. So fortunately for the US, the Fed already started hiking rates and during that 2017 phase. So to Bank of Canada and to a lesser degree, the Bank of England. But unfortunately for Europe, I mean, they've been under pressure for a prolonged period of time from a growth perspective. So they weren't really in a position to increase interest rates. So I think there's going to be a bit of pain. And if you look at the G3, so just a reminder, that's the US, Euro, and Japan, interest rates remain incredibly low during this period. In emerging markets, what we saw as to up to the mid-April, from the 31st of Jan, just to gauge what the reaction was out of policymakers, generally across the board, emerging market banks also cut interest rates. And they were in a position to do that because inflation was low, because growth has really been pedestrian for emerging markets. They've been out of favor with a strong dollar. But I mean, even more severe, if you update this going into last week, you can see South Africa really being very proactive in the interest rate space. And if you look at what the market is pricing in, the sense is that they'll cut by at least another 50 basis points come the end of the month. So, cost of capital is really reducing quite quickly in an effort to try and stimulate the economy. I think the more practical problem, however, is that, it's very difficult for people. The idea generally is reduce rates, you save some money on your bond payment or your car payment or whatever the case is, and people spend that money in the economy to get things going. When there's large portions of people out of the economy and not participating, that money is not ultimately reaching the economy. So it makes it very, very difficult. It makes the stimulus through monetary policy less effective. So a lot of the focus on our government's end has also been on the fiscal policy end, where there needs to be stimulus to make sure that the businesses don't sink. So where they need capital, make capital available, work with the banks to make sure that you can extend credit, et cetera, et cetera. So those type of initiatives we see as of more value given the environment and the problem that we face. Why we say it's all relative, it's just a way of explaining to clients. I think most of us live in an environment where COVID has sort of been the central focus point of our lives. Still many people working from home. We don't live the way that we used to, and there's many uncertainties. But if you take a longer term picture, it actually becomes less relevant in an environment where you're planning in our business, where we plan for multiple decades. We should be careful not to panic too quickly, rather try and navigate this as best possible. So another way of putting this is to say, we try to think in decades in our business as opposed to thinking in days. And this is typically good advice for anyone close to investment markets as well. If you look at the 15-year total return numbers ending to April. So, I mean, this is a very tough period for South Africa. We had the global financial crisis over this period. We had COVID-19 over this period. We had a strong dollar, emerging markets out of favor, very much a risk-off environment, people not willing to give emerging markets the benefit of the doubt. Things don't get much worse than the environment that we had to operate in the preceding 15 years from an investment perspective. But if you look at the all-share return, it was still an annualized 13%. And I think that just emphasizes again, over a short period, it's very possible that you can suffer quite significant losses in equity markets in particular, but you need to give your plan a bit of time. So the fortunate thing is, though, that these numbers are linked to corporate earnings, which are also linked to inflation numbers. So, what products sell to get their earnings, obviously linked to inflation. I think that's a critical underpin in equity markets. And this is just looking at the bond returns and cash returns. And if you look at the actuarial assumptions that we use in our business, we typically assume inflation +2 for cash and 2.5 for bonds, which is pretty accurate in terms of where we actually ended up. And for equities, typically we would use inflation plus roughly 7%. And so over the long term, these numbers do come out of the wash. I think the key problem is that it becomes very volatile and investors tend to make mistakes. Just again to emphasize, what is your likelihood of generating a positive return over shorter periods versus longer periods? Goes without saying, if you give something a little bit more time, the odds improve significantly. Over the short term, it's anybody's guess really in terms of where various asset classes can go. Hence the time.
Sorry to interject, man, and we're just running out of time, and I want to get some questions from the floor. So can you maybe just close it off, and then we can field some questions?
Okay. Let me see if I can. I'll maybe pick 2 or 3 slides for you. This is just looking at recessions and expansion. So we can see these recessions at the bottom are typically short-lived versus expansions, which over time matter quite a lot more. And then just looking at the All-Share Index, these are the drawdowns per calendar year that's experienced. So that's what we experienced this year versus where we stand at the moment. So we understand that markets are under pressure from time to time, but typically they do tend to recover. And I think, you know, in terms of the key issues, I won't go into much of this detail. I'll just mention, I think the key thing is just be aware of cash rates at the moment. Obviously, we're sitting at inflation rate at 4.1%, where interest rates are at 4.25%. So I think it's very important to consider that during the, you know, in any business that's planning as well. You need to consider how your investment income is being impacted through this low interest rate environment. I'll leave it at that. Happy there's actually quite a bit, but I've got the slides and then I've got some notes on the slide, and happy to pass it on for people to review on their own time, and then they're more than welcome to get back to us if they've got any questions from there as well, and we'll get back to you with some responses.
Okay, thank you. I just want to know, a lot of what you shared was international information. I mean, just from the heap, what is your projections for what's gonna happen in South Africa? I mean,
I think
downgraded to junk status now. You know, the economy is obviously suffering tremendously. What do you see happening in South Africa?
I think this year is going to be very, very tough for us. It goes without saying. So if you look at the economy at the moment, there's still more than 50% of the economy is effectively operating in lockdown. And even if you move through some of these levels, even down to level 3 and 2, there's still significant portions of the economy in lockdown. And then there's the other component, the areas that we did rely on to sort of support the economy's growth and reform. It's probably going to be under pressure for a while. So if you look at tourism, for example, I think that's going to be a problem because people are just generally more tentative around travel. So that's going to be a problem. If you look at the expectations through the IMF, we're somewhere in the middle between the typical emerging market and the advanced economies. So not as bad as what we've seen in the US, for example, in terms of a drawdown, but some of the other emerging markets are holding up a whole lot better. I think from a South African perspective, you know, we've been dealing with structural issues long before COVID came. We sit with a situation where the dollar has been very strong. That's had an implication for investment in the country. You know, sentiment has been poor, both from a consumer and business perspective, which hasn't really enabled the economy to attract any foreign direct investment, which is also another problem. I think if we see some dollar deflation take place where it starts to depreciate, I think emerging markets in general will come back into favor. If you look at our market valuation, South Africa is actually quite attractive from a valuation perspective relative to some of the other emerging markets. So we see more attractive in the area where we think the capital is likely to move. That being said, obviously there's still other reform that needs to take place in the country to make sure. I mean, we've got significant issues around energy, which still seems to be largely unknown. So those are the areas that we need to keep an eye on. But still, I think there's significant improvement, my personal view, in terms of how the country is being managed versus how it was managed maybe going back 5 or 10 years. So I think we have a much better probability of getting reforms going. There's much better participation as well from both the private and the public sector in terms of engaging, in terms of what's required. So yeah, to summarize, I think it's going to be tough for the year ahead. I think there will be a recovery going into next year, but I don't think it's going to be a massive recovery from an economic point of view. But despite all of that, I think our investment markets are pricing in fairly bad news, more so than what I think will materialize.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. We're running out of time, so I'm going to deviate from the agenda now. I'm going to ask just from an industry perspective, Yanni, can you tell us from a grain industry perspective what is your prospects? Just a quick 2-minute summary.
Thank you, Omri. Yeah, good morning, everybody. Yeah, at the moment in the north, we're busy harvesting. I've seen quite a few farmers got stuck in their fields. They said it's easy to get in, but not so easy to get out. It is quite wet in some of the northwestern Free State parts. It sounds in the beginning like, you know, the crop is there. It's a very good crop. I think we will have plenty to export as well. In the south, we have started planting the winter cereals, the barley and the wheat and the canola, but it's very dry down there. There is some prospects for the latter half of February, of May, but it's very tough out there. We're already late in terms of the plantings in the Western Cape. So all in all, Omri, I think the supply is good. We might be a bit late. There might be some quality problems here and there, but all in general, the grain sector is going strong. Thank you very much.
And what is your expected tonnage on the maize crop?
Yeah, at the moment, the official number is 15.2 million tons. Yeah, Omri, and there's you know, the chances that it's going to go higher rather than lower is probably bigger.
Okay, thanks, Jannie. Then from a horticulture side, Werner van Rooyen, just a quick 2-minute summary of what's happening.
Yeah, Omri, you catch me here off guard a little bit. I don't see my name on the agenda, but from a horticulture side, I think our exports are doing great, especially out of the northern regions and out of Durban. We've loaded the conventional vessels specifically to capacity. So from the export side, the quality and the fruit volume is looking very good. The markets are also receptive. For some commodities, there's a bit of strain, or some commodities are under pressure in certain markets. But in terms of the volume and in terms of the flow of the horticultural products to the export markets, we're fairly there. We are a little bit worried of hitting our peak in the citrus season volume time, specifically in June, and how the ports are going to handle those. So we are a little bit worried about that. But from a reefer point of view perspective as well, the availability is there. The shipping lines came to the party, and we are managing to get our product out at the moment at a successful rate.
Thank you. Francois Knowles, from your side on the markets. Francois, are you there?
Stay with me.
Hello,
Aubrey. Hi, Aubrey. Are you there?
Yes, we are here.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay, I would like to just quickly run through the figures. I don't know if you can see this. What I would like to talk to is what has happened at fresh produce markets in April. I'll be very brief, and I'm going to go through this only on the issues that matter. What you are looking at is April 2020, and this is compared to the previous year. What has happened is we've had a slight reduction in sales. There was a negative growth on markets of minus 5.77% in terms of turnover, and then there was a negative growth in terms of mass or volumes, minus 8.40. The previous month, you can see there was some panic buying in the last week. It equated to 3.5% growth in turnover and 1.82% in mass. Obviously, we're looking here, the blocks in blue at the top here, those are the three biggest markets, and I would like to include Cape Town. The figures for Cape Town is not included here. There's a reason for that, but we can talk to that some other day. What has happened to specific product lines? Potatoes, there was a negative growth in turnover of minus 24% and volumes minus 13%. Simple reason for that is, remember, restaurants and fast food outlets have now been stopped, not entirely, but they are not functioning as they should. Onions, very interesting. We had a positive growth here of 42% in turnover, and then a negative growth in mass of minus 2. It talks to price inflation. Prices were very high. Onions were doing exceptionally well. Tomatoes, we had a negative growth in turnover, almost 10%, but then we also had a positive growth in volumes going to the market. And what you're seeing there is supply and demand perfectly working together. Vegetables in general, 6.85% growth, and volumes grew by 2%. This is where we probably need to focus, because I think people are spending their money on the basic necessities. Bananas is a particular interesting one. There was a minus 30% negative growth in terms of turnover and volumes as well. So people are not spending money on the luxuries, and you can see this with fruit as well. There was for fruit as a general, excluding bananas, minus 6% growth in turnover, and then minus 23% in volumes presented to the markets. Right, and then just an interesting aspect, we also always look at what is thrown away or what is discarded at fresh produce markets. The markets in yellow represent the three biggest markets, and there's the that is their market share. So we can see right at the bottom here, 1,880 metric tons of waste was generated. This is organic waste and fresh produce thrown away. This is a really important aspect that I think we should focus on to reduce this, because we can ultimately feed people with the volumes that we discard or throw away if we deal with that in a proper way. Touching on the figures, if anybody's interested in that, I can gladly share that. Just quickly, other things, we had a first case study at the Pietermaritzburg market. There was a lady working for the market authority that was positively identified as COVID-19 infected. We dealt with that. We contacted the hotline, the municipal health services, everybody assisted. All the people that were in the region of this lady, they were all placed in isolation, and I think that issue was successfully contained. Currently, the projects that we are running are, we're looking for protocol, COVID-19 protocol for fresh produce markets in general. We're busy with that, and obviously we're focusing on continuous improvement. So issues that we are facing now with markets, there's a problem with cashiers getting to the markets early in the morning. We're ultimately looking at earlier starting hours for people to start selling. We're looking at 5 o'clock, and if it can be done at all, at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I would like to conclude with markets there and just say one or two things on auctions. Livestock auctions in our world is functioning exceptionally well, with two things in mind. Thankfully, the level 4 regulations has helped us to get the police off our backs. So we're working with that, and obviously it was mentioned earlier, the Eastern Cape African swine fever. We're thinking about the 10 plagues hitting us because we've just been through foot and mouth disease. But yeah, we're dealing with that in a positive way.
And grasshoppers.
Yeah, don't say that just yet. Okay, so in those two areas, markets, fresh produce markets, livestock auctions, it's going really well. You can see that I think the sales have stabilized in the value chain at fresh produce markets. We're very happy that livestock auctions are continuing, and with that I'll conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Talking about auctions, Dewald, can you give us some feedback on what's happening in the livestock business?
Morning. I think the big thing which is nice from COVID is I just brought my children to the dentist, and I can do that while having a meeting. Brilliant. With regards to the auctions, yes, we see that it's open and it's going well. The problem that we're having is the abattoirs, and I said it at the previous meeting, are actually slaughtering between 30 and 45% less. We've got carcasses hanging in the chilling rooms, losing weight on a weekly basis or on a daily basis, and obviously the demand is not what we want it to be. I read this morning that actually what's happening in Australia is they have asked for an inquest as to where did the COVID-19 virus originate. Now, that is very nice for us because China said, okay, if that's going to happen, we're going to stop import of Australian meat to China, which obviously opens up some sort of door for us. I do hope that the Australians continue with that inquiry and it will help us. We are exporting currently to China and some of the other markets.
Okay, go on, Dewald.
We are exporting at this stage to some of the other markets, but obviously Jordan and the likes, all of them, they also have in a lockdown. They don't have restaurants and hotels open, so it's going very slowly. But we're penetrating where we can penetrate. We're just seeing it's very slow moving in our local markets. Some of the prices are still very high, so hopefully the prices will drop in the next week or so at the retailers, which will see stimulate the selling of meat, the sale of meat. But yes, we're worried. The problem is the carcasses are hanging. We're selling the offal. We do sell heads in the informal market, but the higher value cuts are not selling at all. The fillets, the rumps, and those are all lying. They're being frozen to be preserved, and it's challenging. I think the guys are very worried. We've got cattle standing in the feedlots that are not going out because there's no demand for it at this stage.
Yeah.
Obviously, that will have a pushback effect on the auctions as well. The guys don't go to the auctions, or a lot less.
Okay. Thanks for that, Dewald. Good luck with the dentist.
Omri,
Yes.
Welmar Ras wat vra.
Welmar?
Ek wil net aansluit by François, maar voor ek by hom aansluit wil ek net eers weet, ek het nie mooi gesien nie of Janri Dievenage, ons CEO in die vergadering is. Janri, is jy daar?
Janri excuse himself, Welmar.
Okay. So ek wil net aansluit by François, Omri, en dit gaan oor die geval wat hy genoem het in Pietermaritzburg. Kyk, ons moet in 'n realiteit leef. Ons is altyd bang om te sê hoeveel kopers op die mark beweeg, maar ons gaan gevalle begin kry. Ons gaan gevalle begin kry by die personeel, markpersoneel, agentepersoneel en die kopers. Ons praat van tientalle duisende mense wat deur beweeg. So dit is die realiteit van die saak en François is besig daarmee en ons is almal besig daarmee hoe presies dit gehanteer gaan word. Maar ek wil net sê dat dit is 'n wonderwerk dat die marke so ver skoon is, maar dit gaan nie so bly nie. So elke keer gaan die prentjie wanneer dit kom by ek praat nie van die verkoop en nie, die res by François gaan bietjie anderster lyk. Ek gaan nou ook met hom 'n gesprek hierna hê. Dit is baie kommerwekkend soos die getalle toeneem. Maar jy weet, dit is net nie moontlik dat ons nie gaan gevalle begin kry nie. Ek noem dit nou maar net, laat dit as 'n skok kom in een van ons vergaderings vorentoe. Dankie.
Dankie, Welmar. Dankie, Welmar. Okay, sorry guys, we've run out of time. I just want to conclude on the question that Earl asked. So as you've heard, the agriculture value chains are going forward. We're obviously seeing an impact on the value chains with the restaurants being closed and the tourism industry being closed. That has a massive impact. At least we got the drive-thrus open and the delivery services for restaurants and foods open. That'll help a little bit. And then obviously the alcohol and the tobacco industries are very, very badly affected by this by the situation. Not just from a local consumption, but also from just generally export. I think what Welmar said is true, and we also heard it from Michelle. It's inevitable that the virus will spread to our industry. And therefore we will apply the necessary protocols and management interventions to make sure that we keep the industry afloat. Right. If there's any questions from the corporate chamber, please contact me, Lali. If there's any questions from the commodity chamber, please contact Yolanda. Sorry, we've run out of time, but I think it was very insightful. Christo, is there anything from your side just to conclude? Christo van der Rede.
Omri, no, I just want to thank everyone for their support. We have been, farmers have been donating food to communities in distress, and in particular, the social year from Last Drift. This project has gained momentum nationally. So if there's anyone that would like to become involved, please contact Mishlali or Yolanda or myself. The news coverage and the thousands and thousands of people that have complimented the Farmers for Initiative is absolutely overwhelming. So let's keep up that momentum. I think we are creating a completely new narrative for the agriculture sector that will stand us in good stead going into the future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you for the great work that you guys are doing there as well. I'm just going to conclude. I want to thank Michelle and Earl for being on the call. You guys are doing an extremely important job for our industry, and we really want to thank you. We will get you some wine when the wine industry is open. The next thing is sorry, Michelle.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I think I said the last time, that's the one thing that I'm missing at the moment. But look, just to emphasize, we are here to help wherever we can. Please do not allow your produce not to be moved through the ports. If there's a hiccup anyway, if we have the information, we can make a plan. That's the most important thing. You get us the information, we can try and make a plan.
Thanks, Michelle.
Okay, but certainly during this time, our priority is the food chain and getting your product exported. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Earl. You guys are doing a great job. And then to Brett and Adrian, thank you for the presentation. You will send that to Mitali so that we can distribute it to everybody on the call. Thank you for that explanation on where we are. I think it puts it in context. Then just Pierre, can you just stay on? I just want to have a chat to you, Pierre Verkuil. Okay, guys, I'm going to close it now. We've run a little bit out of time. Thank you for attending. We'll do this every 2 weeks so that we get a strategic update of what is going on, and also, where we are in terms of the economy and what is happening in the greater world. I want to thank all of you that attended this meeting, and have a good week further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Omri.
Thank you, Omri. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ja, jy moet opbly hoor.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.